I was asked to speak about diets because I think everyone that I know is inundated with information about different diets, and of course we all are interested to some degree about different diets that may help. So the title is All the Buzz About Diets, and when I was picking PowerPoints, honestly, I kind of liked this particular template because when I looked at it, it put my mind into overdrive, and honestly that's what all the buzz about diets does to my brain, and I am a professional in this area. So what I'm saying is when you get all this information, it tends to make your brain go a little bit crazy. So I'm hoping maybe that we can give some clarity to the issue about diets and which ones are maybe better than others. So in terms of an overview, I will say a few introductory words, in particular regarding why diets are popular and how to evaluate information sources, especially what sources to trust or not to trust. And then we're going to look at, I would say, some buzzwords because there are a lot of buzzwords out there, but we'll look at the anti-inflammatory diet. I put this one first because I do think there is merit to this idea, and this is probably, if I'm promoting anything in particular, I'm promoting this concept, and I'll talk more about that as we go. The autoimmune protocol is a diet that is out there, and given that Scleroderma is an autoimmune condition, I think there's some buzz about this particular diet in this community. The ketogenic diet is popular, as well as intermittent fasting. So these are the ones that I picked for the limited time that we have. In general, I'm going to encourage you to decide whom you trust and what approaches you would like to try, and to consider an elimination challenge approach as long as you don't do any harm. For instance, as long as you don't lose a lot of weight unintentionally, or as long as you don't feel really poorly, or maybe as long as it isn't super disruptive to your life, or maybe as long as it's not too expensive. And as I mentioned before, we will look at what to eat that is, in quotes, a little bit anti-inflammatory, that also packs calories, as a number of people who are living with Scleroderma have to really make an effort to eat enough to gain weight. Okay, so why are diets popular? As I've thought about this, I think one of the reasons they're popular is that we care about doing something that will help our health. We also have control over diet. What we eat sometimes is more control than over our particular circumstance or condition. I think, though, you have to remember that anecdotes abound. So anecdotes are stories that come from people. And I think I would give you some caveats, and one is that what might work for one person might not work for you. I would also say that when people come out, whether it's to you personally or online or in some other kind of media, if they say, well, this diet helped me cure my problem. You know, I did this diet and now I no longer have X. I think you have to keep in mind that it may not have been the diet that caused the quote cure. I'm not saying diet is not important, but I'm trying to instill a sense of skepticism because I think it's too hard, it's too easy to fall into oh well, this could be a potential cure-all, and I'm going to argue that that probably is not the case. I'm not disputing someone's personal experience, but I'm saying take it with a grain of salt to some degree, and then potentially, if you find their story so compelling, maybe try the diet, but give it a test. Try it out, see if you think it helps you, and then ideally don't do any harm. Keep in mind that egos and opportunists abound, and what I mean by this is that there are people who are promoting diets very, very passionately, and I would argue that some of them are really well-intentioned. I would argue, though, that some of them are not, meaning they're more in it for their own profit or for their own notoriety, and I think that's hugely problematic. I think some people are very well-intentioned but deluded, to be totally honest, and they are often the ones that are the most passionate, and I think that's problematic. There are also people who are not so well-intentioned and they're not so deluded, and I think they are preying on people's fears. And I think that's really unfortunate. Okay, so in terms of evaluating information sources, who you should trust or not trust, I think it's true in the nutrition arena as well as everywhere that what you believe is essentially based on whom you trust. I'm going to tell you who I trust. Not that you have to trust who I trust, but I'm going to give you an opinion on this, and then I'm going to ask you to make your own decision. I tend to trust expert consensus. So experts are people who are capable of evaluating scientific evidence. Usually that means they have a PhD, and they do so for the benefit of public health and the pursuit of knowledge with minimal, if any, conflicts of interests. And I would have to say that it's hard to find people or even organizations without conflicts of interest. But I tend to trust what is considered the medical and nutrition academic medical establishment. So these are people who have dedicated their lives to trying to find out, quote, the truth, or as close as we can get to it, in order to help not only themselves, but public health. Like people in the academies, in general, are dedicated to helping you, not to selling a book, and not to helping themselves or helping their own cause. So I put my faith in them. I also put my faith in them because they have logical, compelling arguments that hold water when you examine them pretty closely. I distrust people who have weak credentials or who make assertions without backing them up with compelling and logical arguments. People or organizations that use tactics like fear-mongering or too good to be true guarantees, are fanatical and or maybe seeking celebrity status or significant financial gain. And this is rampant from my perspective. So I think you really have to examine who's telling you what and look at their arguments, look at what they're saying. Does it sound too good to be true? Does it sound like you're feeling a little bit scared because of what they're saying? You're going to get X unless you do what I say. And did they start with good intentions but then get wrapped up in celebrity status of what comes with kind of being a spokesperson or being the advocate of a particular cause or a particular diet? Okay. So, having said that, let's look at the anti-inflammatory diet. I wanted to start with this one, like I said, because I do believe there's a lot of good things about this approach. What I would like you to know is that this particular term was really coined by Dr. Andrew Weil, and on his website, he calls it his own diet. It's Dr. Weil's anti-inflammatory diet. So, I appreciate that because he's saying this is what I think. He's not saying this is the absolute truth, he's saying this is what I think. And what he says is that this is not really a diet in a popular sense. It's really not intended to be a weight loss program, not is it intended to be an eating plan to stay on for a limited period of time. Rather, it's a way of selecting and preparing anti-inflammatory foods based on scientific knowledge to counteract chronic inflammation, which is a root cause of diseases. And in general, I think this is valid. I think most of the medical establishment buys into this. So I'm on board. I'm also going to present some of the tips because I think it's important to see that it's not just about particular foods, it's also about a way of eating and to some degree a way of living. So what he says is the first and most important step is to eliminate refined, processed, and manufactured foods, including fast foods. He was actually on NPR, interviewed it was 2 days ago. And they were talking about how 4 to 5 nights or days a week, the typical American is eating out or not eating food that was cooked in the home. And that's problematic. And I realize that we all need convenience, but to some degree, I'm going to push the fact that, and I'm using him to help me push the fact that you need to put effort into it. You need to put the time that's required into planning and prepping and cooking to some degree. And if you can't do it, and you're looking for support and or you're looking to purchase foods that come as close to something that you would make in your own kitchen. So other tips, aim for variety, include as much fresh food as possible, limit your consumption of processed foods and fast foods, and eat abundance of fruit and vegetables. I think probably everyone here knows that. Here are the top 10 anti-inflammatory foods. Dark leafy greens like spinach and kale, cruciferous vegetables, cabbage and broccoli, berries, different colors, black beans, lentils, whole grains, edamame, which are soybeans, Dr. Weil pushes Asian well mushrooms and tea, including green tea. So now these are his foods that he's chosen as being the best. If you go to his website, you'll find his food pyramid, and you'll see that vegetables and fruits make up the base. So 4 to 5 servings of vegetables a day, fruit 3 to 4 servings a day, whole and cracked grains 3 to 5 servings a day, pasta ideally not cooked until mush and or whole grain 2 to 3 servings a week, beans and legumes 1 to 2 servings a day, healthy fats. There are good fats in this diet, 5 to 7 servings a day, and incidentally, it does not include coconut oil. So he excludes coconut oil from his diet, his anti-inflammatory diet. Fish and shellfish, 2 to 6 servings per week, so you can get DHA and EPA, which are the heart-healthy anti-inflammatory omega-3s. Whole soy foods, 1 to 2 servings per day. Cooked Asian mushrooms, unlimited, and I would have to say he tends to be the one that pushes the Asian mushrooms. Which I'm fine with mushrooms. It's just this is a little bit unique to him. And other protein sources, 1 to 2 servings a week, as well as healthy herbs and spices. So, and then I couldn't fit on the top, but he does have tea, and he does also recommend supplements, which I'm not thrilled with. And that's probably one of the reasons why I don't particularly like his approach, because I don't tend to think you need supplements. However, he recommends certain supplements that he thinks are anti-inflammatory, like turmeric. I would encourage you to consider those supplements and try not to do harm if you're going to use them. So the way you do that is you choose a third-party certified supplement. Third-party certified supplements have been tested by objective organizations to make sure that they don't contain contaminants or other toxins, to make sure that they contain what they actually say they contain, and that they have consistency among the batches. You can also make sure you're not taking megadoses of vitamins and minerals. So I wouldn't recommend megadoses of anything, because there's risks associated with megadoses, and megadose tends to be more than 500% of the daily value on a nutritional supplement. Okay, the sweets are at the top of his as sparingly like dark chocolate. Okay, so I wanted to some degree, so that's his diet. It's a diet he conceived, it's a diet he promotes. What I wanted to say is that academic medical and nutrition experts recognize the concept of an anti-inflammatory diet as relatively valid. And the concept is that you select foods that contain anti-inflammatory properties to reduce chronic inflammation. This is essentially what Dr. Weil says too. Chronic inflammation is linked to chronic diseases. I mentioned some of them here. So I wanted to explain this just a little bit, because there's a decent rationale or basis behind this, and that is that in studies, chronic inflammation can actually be measured by certain biomarkers. These are substances in your blood or chemicals, telltale chemicals that circulate in the blood. C-reactive protein is one of those. Other proteins released by the immune system called cytokines are other ones, and we can measure these. And we know that plants produce thousands of compounds that are phytochemicals, and these phytochemicals are for plant functions. Some of them also happen to be anti-inflammatory for us. And so eating plant foods with anti-inflammatory phytochemicals is associated with lower levels of biomarkers of inflammation in our blood. So there's a direct link. However, that's probably where the science stops. And they would say, well, we don't have enough research to really template an anti-inflammatory diet like Dr. Weil does. And it's not really proven that while anti-inflammatory foods reduce the biomarkers of inflammation in our blood, that they actually prevent disease at this point. That hasn't necessarily been proven. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't help, but it hasn't been proven. So there isn't one true anti-inflammatory diet. What we have out there is Dr. Weil saying, here's what I think. And you have the medical establishment saying, yeah, that looks pretty good, but we're not going to necessarily endorse it because it's not proven. But for the most part, he's kind of on. They wouldn't necessarily endorse the supplements, but as long as you're not doing any harm, there might be potential benefit with certain supplements like turmeric. I would personally, I would tell you to drink turmeric tea or use turmeric to spice your food, and you can use like half a teaspoon a day or you could buy the actually fresh root and make tea. So this is what I do. I do ginger and turmeric tea, fresh, cut it, put it in water, put some boiling water on it, boil it if I need to a little bit more, and then add some lemon to it. It's delicious, and it makes me feel good, and it's definitely not doing any harm. Okay, do I have anything else on that? Yes, I have a few more slides. So in terms of diets that are associated with anti-inflammatory effects in our body or in our blood, that's the dietary approaches to stop hypertension diet, known as the DASH diet. It looks kind of like the anti-inflammatory, Dr. Wild's anti-inflammatory diet. Lots of vegetables, lots of whole grains, fruits, etc. Mediterranean diet, again, very similar pattern. The MIND diet is actually a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet, very similar pattern, and vegetarian. So all of these overlap a lot, and therefore I think that's a good sign that we're on the right track. We don't necessarily have a template yet, but we have a lot of good examples and a lot of good ideas. In terms of some other last tips, foods that inflame would be the processed foods as well as red meat, sugary beverages. And foods that fight inflammation this is redundant to some degree, but these are the foods that make up the anti-inflammatory diet as well as the other diets like the Mediterranean diet or vegetarian diets or the DASH diet. And again, it's all connected back to the fact that we can see that our biomarkers of inflammation actually decrease in our blood. And I would argue that the blue zones of the world, these are areas of the world where people live longer without the incidence of disease, so they're living longer without disease. They're eating a plant-based, anti-inflammatory, whatever you want to call it, kind of like this diet. And so this is the direction that I encourage people to go. So we're going to look at a little gallery of what I would recommend you eat that is, quote, anti-inflammatory that also packs calories. So I wanted to bring it to life a little bit because food isn't about, legumes are legumes. Who wants to eat a legume? You actually want to eat something that's, you want to be seduced by your food to some degree. And so I think I like to promote food that's healthy, but it's also, quote, anti-inflammatory. So you could do a full-fat Greek yogurt with low-sugar granola and some whole berries. And the reason I'm putting the whole fat up here is that I'm working under the assumption that you may need to eat more to maintain weight or gain weight. If that is not the case, obviously, you wouldn't be doing as many high-calorie items. You could do a whole grain like oatmeal, but there are other whole grain cereals. I would put more nuts in there than sugar, and I would also probably douse this with cinnamon, and you can put fresh fruit in there. You could do an egg vegetable omelet or an egg vegetable scramble. This is probably my favorite. So eggs and a variety of vegetables. I would probably put some kind of a starch with this, whether it be whole grain bread, or ideally something like sweet potato or butternut squash or a potato, but get some good starch with this as well. You could do bread with peanut butter and honey. You could do bread with this kind of the egg, avocado, bean sprouts approach. If you're snacking, so those are some breakfast ideas. This is hummus. It's beautiful. It's one of my favorite things in the world. You could snack on pecan husks. Nuts are extremely calorie dense and they're full of really good, healthy fat. I believe the highest fat nut is the macadamia nut. So a cup of macadamia nuts has close to 1,000 calories in it, and a cup is not that much. So if you're trying to put on some weight, measure your nuts and eat them every day. Can't do nuts for some reason, do nut butters. Here's another potential snack. You can tell I'm kind of liking the bread, egg, avocado strategy. Here's more hummus that you can have with a whole wheat pita. You could do muffins. You can use at least half of the flour as whole wheat flour. You can do some berries, and if that were me, I would be toasting them and putting some peanut butter on it. For lunch, and I'm hoping you're getting the sense here that we want color and we want variety. I think these foods look like they have power, and they do. So these are fish tacos. What you'll see is more guacamole than cheese. You could do roasted chicken with roasted potatoes and do some herbs with that. You could do a lentil carrot soup, very colorful, put some brown rice in it, rather than eating with crackers or bread, for example. You could do fish with rice, ideally we probably do brown rice, it's hard to get a picture of that online, with some vegetables. If you're drinking, ideally you're not drinking sugar calories, so I recommend people do water. Plain water is just fine. I realize that in our country and in the first world, some people really can't deal with plain water, although I think that is a first world problem. But if you can't deal with plain water, infuse it. Put cucumber in it. I thought that was silly, and then my friend gave me cucumber water. I'm like, oh, this is lovely. You can do fruit in it. You could do plain tea. So this is hibiscus tea with some berries and mint. And I realize we're all not like spending our time trying to make these like gourmet meals, but what I'm trying to do is put some really positive images up there of healthy food in order to counteract all the nasty images that we're getting of unhealthy food. So I'm trying to promote this because I think it has to be promoted. And as I mentioned, so we've got the water, plain water, we've got infused water, we've got unsweetened tea. I mentioned the ginger and turmeric tea. What else comes to mind? I feel like I'm forgetting some. Those are some big ones. But drink plenty of fluids that don't contain sugar. In terms of dinner, this happens to be a tofu dish. But you could do teriyaki chicken with some steamed broccoli and maybe some fruit, like pineapple on the side. And what you'll notice too is that I put up certain portions. So I don't just want like 2 pieces of chicken. If you're trying to really pack some calories, you need 4 to 6 ounces, which is at least the size of a reasonably big smartphone. What I tell people to do is when you're buying this stuff, when you're at the counter buying your fish, I was buying salmon this morning, I said I want 12 ounces. And I said I want 3 pieces that are 4 ounces each. And the guys behind the counter know me, so I walk up and they're cutting the salmon. But then you know that that's what you're getting. So you don't have to weigh it at home, and then you can eyeball it, and then you know what you're getting. So when you buy stuff, ask for the right portion. And if you need more than 4 ounces, then go more. This is actually red meat. I do think there is a place for red meat for people who do like red meat. In general, the recommendations are no more than 1 to 2 servings. Serving size is about 4 ounces per week of red meat. People who like red meat and want to eat red meat, it's hard to distinguish that amount of red meat from no red meat at all. So there's probably a little bit of leeway to include some. I would pick a lean cut. I would probably pick grass fed if you could. Do some grilled vegetables and a nice cucumber side to it. You could do lentil soup. There are pretty pictures online. Lentil soup. There are other legumes out there. You can do black bean soup. You can do white beans with other proteins. And this is a ratatouille. So if you need to pack calories, I would say cook your vegetables in oil. You can either grill them or saute them or roast them. Put some herbs, put some garlic in there, and then put a piece of protein on the side of it. Okay, so that's the anti-inflammatory approach. I did spend most of my time on that. We're going to go now to the other 3 buzzwords. One is the autoimmune protocol. How many of you have heard this term? Okay, so not quite half, but people have heard it. This particular approach was developed by Lauren Cordain. He's a PhD, he's got good credentials, professor of health and exercise science at CSU, as well as Rob Wolf, who is a former research biochemist, seems to have decent credentials. There's a woman named Sarah Valentine. She's a PhD. She's known as the Paleo Mom, and she really promotes the autoimmune protocol. So this diet is an elimination challenge diet, and it's based on the paleo diet, but it's more restrictive. It avoids additional foods that, quote, stimulate the immune system or harm the gut, and that may be triggers for your disease. So some pieces of information to consider. Dr. Cordain authored the paleo diet, and his premise is essentially that the paleo diet is the one and only diet that ideally fits our genetic makeup. I personally have problems with the premise of the paleo diet. And there's plenty of debate out there. I'm just going to give you my opinion. And that is that Hunter-gatherers did not live on one diet. Depending on where they lived and what they had available, where they migrated to, they ate almost everything you can imagine that was available. And there was more than just the paleo diet available at the time. So I fundamentally disagree with the premise of this diet. That's my opinion. Rob Wolf promotes himself as a two-time New York Times best-selling author, one of the world's leading experts in Paleolithic nutrition. He has transformed the lives of tens of thousands of people, and it goes on. I'm not particularly impressed with self-promotion. So this does not impress me. This is my opinion. I worry that people are going to be impressed by this and then flock this direction. Sarah Ballantyne herself has lost over 100 pounds and turned her health around using the autoimmune protocol. This is her story. She has a story to tell. And I'm not going to dispute that. I'm happy she found something that worked for her. If you happen to do a little bit of research and look at what she did, she talks about using the autoimmune protocol and want to try it. Again, what I'm going to tell you is there may be value, there may be some value in this approach. The only way you'll know is if you actually try it. So what that would look like is doing the elimination challenge diet, ideally without losing a substantial amount of weight or strength or money or whatever else might be potentially harmful. So here are the yes foods. You can eat organ meats and offal, which I think offal is like other parts of the innards, five or more times a week. You can also do quality meats, which are grass-fed, pasture-raised, and wild. You can do fish and shellfish 3 or more times a week. You can do a lot of veggie. You've got to eat your veggies on this diet. So 8 to 14 cups a day. Fruit. You can eat fruit, but you got to be careful about fructose. So most fruit has fructose in it. Some are higher than others. You have to learn how to count up your fructose. So it actually has a specific 10 to 40 grams per day or less of fructose. I think that's a little challenging just because then you're rooting around the internet trying to figure out how much fructose is in things. I will tell you that probably the best source for the nutrient content of foods is the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA maintains a database of most whole foods as well as branded foods. And if you go in there and can navigate their not super friendly interface, you can actually pick a food like an apple, which is a little bit higher in fructose, and pick full nutrients of an apple, and it will give you probably 100 nutrients that are in that apple, and they list fructose. And they'll tell you how much fructose is in that apple. So if you're interested in the minutia like that, which sometimes can be helpful for people who either want to try an elimination challenge diet like this, or might have legitimate issues with fructose or other small micronutrients, then it's available. So that's a good resource. This particular diet recommends healthy fats, and it does include coconut in moderation. Herbs and spices, probiotics, and fermented foods. Oops, let me go back there so you can look at it. So this is what you would be eating. And there are cookbooks, there's recipes, there's menus online that you can find if you want to try this approach. Most people don't like how restrictive it is, and I do think that's one of the drawbacks. But this is what it looks like, and I'm not discouraging you from trying it. I just don't want you to do any harm while you're trying it. And I also want you to try and stay objective about whether or not you think it's helping your symptoms. And I will say this, the other caution with trying more experimental diets is that there is such a thing as a placebo effect. Okay, it won't necessarily, it only goes so far. I find it hard to imagine that it could actually cure most people, the placebo effect that is. But there is such a thing as a placebo effect. And sometimes, if trying something and not doing yourself any harm helps because of the placebo effect, then I'm going to argue that it helps. I'm going to tell you that that's a benefit in and of itself. As long as you're not doing any harm and you're meeting your nutrient needs and you're maintaining your energy and your weight. So I'm trying to be open-minded and I'm trying to give you things to consider. In terms of what's not allowed, these are the no foods: alcohol, eggs, especially the whites, those are bad. Coffee, grains, dairy. Legumes are things like what you might think of as beans. So lentils, black beans, chickpeas, red beans, white beans. No refined and processed oils and sugars, yay, I think everyone agrees about that. Sugar substitutes, not allowed. Nuts and seeds, and including cocoa or chocolate. Nightshade fruits and vegetables, and those are listed on here. Oh, is that all I've got? Okay. Yeah, so it is, as I mentioned at the beginning, the autoimmune protocol is the paleo diet, but it is more restrictive. And people who promote this basically say these potentially might be triggers for your immune system that are bad. And as far as I can tell, so this is where, in my opinion, there's holes. There's really not a good, compelling argument for how that works. They describe it, but you start to look at it and you go, it doesn't really make sense, or at least not to me. Unfortunately, it may make sense for people who don't have as much of a science background, or it may make sense because you're stretching, but there's not a cogent argument here, in my opinion. I'm not saying there isn't benefit necessarily from the diet for some people, as long as you don't do harm. So I'm repeating myself, but that's the message I'm giving you. The ketogenic diet. There are 5 versions of the ketogenic diet that have been published in the medical literature that have been effective treatments for diseases like epilepsy, particularly pediatric epilepsy, cancer, and Alzheimer's. The original ketogenic diet was developed by Dr. Russell Wilder at the Mayo Clinic in 1923. It was specifically for the treatment of pediatric epilepsy in whom medication was ineffective. And this diet worked, and it still works today. All ketogenic diets are a variation of this classic keto diet, and the classic keto is the most strict, but it is the therapeutic diet. All ketogenic diets are described by a ratio of fat to protein and carbs combined. It's called the macronutrient ratio. So the classic keto diet has a macronutrient ratio of 4:1. That means you eat 4 grams of fat to every 1 gram of protein and carbohydrate combined. This diet is 90% fat and 10% protein and carbohydrate. So I searched for good pictures. Oh, sorry. The main difference between the 5 types of keto diets is this macronutrient ratio. Not quite at my pictures yet. So all ketogenic diets are high in fat, they're adequate in protein, and they're low in carbs. And essentially, the combination changes the way your body uses food for energy. And what happens is fatty acids and ketones, which are produced when you're not eating a lot of carbohydrates, become the body's primary fuel sources instead of carbs. This is real. This is what's your metabolism. In other words, there's good rationale, scientific basis behind this. Okay, so I just wanted to put up an example of an 1,800 calorie diet, and I didn't translate it into necessarily tons of foods, but I'll talk about this a little bit. For a classic keto diet that's 1,800 calories, you'd be eating 180 grams of fat. That's a lot. Only 27 grams of protein and 18 grams of carbohydrates. To put this in perspective a little bit, a 4-ounce piece of chicken breast has about 27 grams of protein. So that would be what you'd be eating per day. A large Granny Smith apple would have about 18 grams of carbohydrates. So not that that's what you'd be eating, and I'll talk about the pictures on here, but in theory, you wouldn't be eating, your protein would be low-ish, but adequate in order to spare the protein on your body from being used for energy, in theory. You wouldn't be eating tons of carbs because we're restricting our carbs so your body turns to fat as a source of fuel. So, actually, these are pretty pictures. So let me explain what this is. So those pancakes down there are made from macadamia nuts and some oil and egg, and then a no sugar syrup. They're actually made with a no sugar, no calorie syrup. I didn't realize those things existed, but Walden Farms makes a no calorie, no sugar syrup, as well as other foods. So it looks really good. Then we have some meat there. I think that may be lamb with a little bit of veggies. That's actually a squash soup, and squash is a starchy veggie, so that's where you're going to get some carbs. And what's in there is basically squash with onion and coconut milk, full fat. So it's mostly fat. And then as you can see, we've got skewers, so those might be beef, pork, and lamb, a blend. And that is avocado ice cream, which is not made with sugar. So it's made with avocados and coconut milk. So that is what, I think that is the best looking keto diet you're going to see. That's my opinion. So what am I going to say about the keto diet? This is popular. This is popular for a number of reasons. People do lose weight on this diet. Whether or not they keep the weight off, it appears that other diets are just as good as keto diet, helping people lose weight and keep it off, which probably means that it's not very good. So in other words, you lose weight, but then it's hard to sustain. The metabolism, the rationale of the metabolism is real. So your body will convert to burning fat. That is true. It's just hard to keep this up. I would also argue that some of the problems with this is that some people feel really low energy on this diet. You definitely cannot run a marathon, training for a marathon, or some kind of heavier exercise routine on this type of diet unless you supplement it with some kind of carbohydrate, usually. It's hard to sustain, and I would argue that you're cutting out some really healthy anti-inflammatory food groups. So in terms of long-term, I don't think it's a great approach. That's my opinion, but it is out there. It is potentially worth trying if you want to try and kickstart some weight loss if you are trying to lose weight. That's not an unreasonable thing to consider. Okay, intermittent fasting. This is also very popular. So intermittent fasting is a diet regimen that basically alternates between periods of fasting, brief periods of fasting, as well as periods of unrestricted eating. So fasting doesn't necessarily mean no food. It just means highly restricted, maybe 25% of what you normally eat. It's promoted to change body composition through loss of fat and weight and to improve markers of health that are associated with disease, like blood pressure, I would argue blood sugar, and cholesterol levels. So how it works, there's kind of different varieties of this as well. You can alternate days. So you can alternate between days of no food restriction with days that consist of one meal that provides about 25% of your daily calorie needs. So for instance, you might fast on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, meaning you eat about 25% of what you normally do, and then the other days you eat like you normally do. You can have whole day fasting. So this means that 1 to 2 days per week you are complete fasting, or up to 25% of daily calorie needs, which is what most people do. They just do very hypo, low-calorie days. The other days would be no food restrictions. So people, you may hear about the 5-2 approach. This means that you don't restrict your food on 5 days, but on the other 2 days you are restricting your intake to maybe 400 to 500 calories a day. And then the time-restricted feeding, and I think this is probably the most reasonable approach, and that is that you eat during certain hours of the day, and then you stop and you don't eat until the next morning. So you essentially follow a meal plan with a designated time for fasting. So you might eat between 8 and 3, and then fast until the next morning. I see a lot of, I actually recommend this on occasion because honestly I see a lot of people who get into all the wrong kinds of foods later on. Yeah. So this is a good approach to some degree. It kind of normalizes how you maybe should be eating. Okay. So in summary then, diets are and they will continue to be popular. I would expect reincarnations and reinventions over time. You have to decide who you trust. I've told you who I trust. The anti-inflammatory diet selects foods that contain anti-inflammatory properties in order to reduce chronic inflammation. Colorful vegetables and fruits, healthy fats, whole grains, herbs, and spices. I do promote this approach. Autoimmune protocol diet, it's an elimination challenge diet based on the paleo approach. It's just more restrictive. Ketogenic diet is high in fat, adequate in protein, and low in carbs. And intermittent fasting alternates between eating and prolonged periods of fasting. So as I've said now a number of times, consider an elimination challenge diet if you're interested in an experimental diet to test whether a diet is right for you. Be mindful to do no harm. And enjoy an anti-inflammatory approach to eating that helps you feel good and maintain a healthy weight. That's my bottom line. So that's it. I'll take some questions if you all have questions. Okay, why don't I start down here?
Great presentation, thank you for that. What rate on the anti-inflammatory that surprised me, half that's on there was coffee. I'm just thinking pH versus acidity.
Okay, so the question is about coffee on the anti-inflammatory diet. Your concern was that it is too acidic.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, so think about that. First of all, I'll say that it's my understanding is that it is on Dr. Weil's anti-inflammatory diet because there are good antioxidants that are in coffee as well as in tea. So coffee is thought of as a healthy beverage now. Of course, I would say don't overdo it. If you can't sleep or if you have heart issues or whatever, you know, that might be a reason to limit your coffee intake. Regarding the acidity of coffee, that may come into play if you have reflux, gastroesophageal reflux, and especially if you have symptoms when you drink coffee. So in that instance, I would say you may want to consider limiting it and or avoiding it if that's not hard for you to do. And what that looks like is 1 or 2 small 6-ounce cups maybe earlier in the day, and then stopping after that. So I think, as is the case with a lot of diets, you have to decide what works best for you based on what you're dealing with. So that's, I guess, does that answer your question? Okay. I'm going to start with, I can't remember who had their hand up first. Let's go to the gentleman with the glasses.
I've heard over and over that gluten is one of the biggest pro-inflammation foods out there, and I didn't really see that in your presentation at all.
Okay, so the question is regarding gluten. And so the gentleman was saying that gluten has been touted as one of the most inflammatory substances out there, and that wasn't in my presentation. And so this is definitely a controversial area. The medical and nutritional establishment does not say that gluten is inflammatory. In other words, we don't see that it changes your biomarkers in your blood that indicate inflammation. And we would argue that there's a lot of benefits to gluten, with the exception of people who have celiac disease, in which case gluten is triggering an autoimmune response. So for people who have celiac and a true autoimmune response to it, those people have to be strict in avoiding gluten forever, for lifelong. There is an alternative opinion out there that gluten is inflammatory, and all I can say is that they're different sources, and you have to decide if you want to trust those sources. I will also say that anecdotally, I've had people tell me that when they stop eating gluten, their joints stop hurting or something. And to me, that's the perfect example of trying an elimination. I would argue you should also try challenging then your diet with gluten. But that's an example of, if you've tried it and it seems to cause adverse symptoms for you, you don't need it. Maybe, that's completely fine. You can exclude it from your diet. Just make sure you replace it with other grains that are gluten-free that will give you the nutrients and the fiber that you need to have a healthy anti-inflammatory diet. So I don't think it's necessary, but it's something that can be beneficial if you tolerate it well. So, and let me say another thing. I've had people say, well, I tried to get rid of gluten in my diet, really didn't change anything, so I added it back in. And for those people, I would say, you probably are fine eating gluten.
So it's just there's two thoughts on this related. Some say that it is something that promotes inflammation, and some say it doesn't.
Yeah,
we don't know really for sure.
The medical establishment says one thing, other people say other things. So truly, this is that you've got to decide who you're going to trust. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I know there were some other hands. Okay, the woman in orange.
In the past, say in the past 15 years or so, it used to be that we have a food pyramid, and these were the good things, and they told you what the bad things were, and now it seems like all the bad things are the good things. And we were still using scientific studies to do this. So when you say, who do you trust, that really is a good question.
Sorry, can you say what you said at the end?
when you say it depends on who you trust,
Yeah.
that really is a good question, because experts design the first one, and supposedly experts design the one that's for a reason.
Okay, so I think I understand. So the comment and or question is regarding who to trust because science changes. So it seems like what was recommended not that long ago, all of a sudden is recommended, and then all of a sudden we flip. And so the question is, do we trust science? Because it's changing. And my response to that is science, by its nature, evolves. And your doctor is probably telling you something different today than they did 20 years ago. So medical science is evolving, nutrition science is evolving. Nutrition actually is a nascent, it's a younger science. So when you go into it, you have to accept that it's going to change. And I would argue that you should go with you have to accept that as part of the process. But what I do is I go with the best available evidence and the best available expert consensus. You go based on the best available knowledge of the day and accept that tomorrow it might be a little different. But at least there's a rationale behind it and there's evidence behind it.